It's Super Bowl time. You can sign up at MyBookie. Use our promo code Gators to get your first ever deposit match dollar for dollar. Bet on all the Super Bowl game props as well. Bet on anything, anywhere, anytime with MyBookie.
This is a special place, right? I mean, this is a real opportunity, right? One that's very capable, The key here is that we take all this potential and we translate that to performance, right?
Want more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
Certainly never a dull moment on National Signing Day, but maybe a little duller than we wanted. Will Miles, here we are on National Signing Day. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Will Miles joins me. Follow him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC and at Read and Reaction. Will, it's setting up for not too much of a dull day for Florida, but in the end, kind of disappointing. A dull finish to Billy Napier's first 2022 recruiting class for the Gators. We'll get into the class, overall transition class, 4A transition class, not bad. But just on the day of National Signing Day, Florida had some targets, going after those targets. Felt good, but in the end, was not able to wrangle in the top targets. So we'll get into it here, Will. But Billy Napier's first National Signing Day in the books.
Yeah, I mean it's one I think most of us would like to forget. Felt a little bit like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football getting pulled out from under you as the news came through for Trevante Citizen and then Harold Perkins, and obviously by the time Jacoby Matthews made his decision at 7:00, pretty much everybody knew that he was going to Texas A&M just like every other recruit this cycle. So hey, look, the reality is Napier said at his press conference, you're not going to hit on all of them. I think there are some very positive things in this class. I think there are also some things that are concerning. And, I had my preview up this week for National Signing Day. And one of the things that I said is that what getting Perkins or getting Matthews was going to do was answer questions about Napier's ability to recruit and win those battles with the big boys. And I don't know that it has I don't think that this has answered it in a negative way that he can't get it done, but I think it means it's still an open question, right? And so at the end of the day, it's an open question. We've been saying now for a while, and specifically, I think when they were down ranked 77th, said for a while, you're probably looking at a class that ends up somewhere in the 15 to 20 range. There's an opportunity to get up above that if they hit on a guy like Perkins, but at the end of the day, not able to put that not able to put pen to paper and get him to sign. And so I think you have a class that is an effective transition class, but you've fallen behind again further, right? You've fallen behind Georgia. You've fallen behind Alabama. You've fallen behind Texas A&M. Those top three teams in the SEC occupy the 1, 2, and 3 slots there in the recruiting. And that's where Napier needs to get. And so that's what we need to see next year is one of those 3 teams battling at the top needs to be Florida. And, we'll obviously be here monitoring it the whole way through and seeing whether the relationships and, that whole one day at a time, one person at a time stuff sounds great. But 2023 is when the rubber hits the road and you're really going to have to see it next year. 12th isn't going to be good enough. Certainly 20th, where Florida State is this year, is not going to be good enough next year. And, that's sort of what we've been saying all along, right? Is that 2023 is where you really got to look at it. And 2022 is more of a building your foundation and putting everything in place. So he's got his whole staff in place. He, except for maybe a couple of people, he mentioned that today. He has gone through the development or at least the rapid fire recruiting that happens with a transition class. And now he's got some time and we'll see what he can do with it.
All right, let's get into what Billy Napier had to say on the approach and where Florida stands after National Signing Day before we break down this class a bit more and what happened here on National Signing Day.
This is a special place, right? I mean, I don't think I've ever batted 1,000 on signing day. You have to tell some of our young people in the building, hey, this is a little more like baseball here, right? We gotta, you gotta swing a lot, and make contact. And at the end of the day, we need 25 really good hits, right? So it requires a little bit of perspective, if that makes sense. So, and resiliency, I would say. So, you got to have a short memory. You got to move on to the next one. And certainly as a competitor, some of those things that maybe you learned as a competitor, you can apply to recruiting for sure. But, we feel a lot of needs. I'm confident in each individual player that we've added, what they bring to the team, certainly the jobs that we think they can do for our team. But we're never, I don't think anybody's ever completely satisfied with what happens.
There we go, Will. So there's kind of the process, and of course, never satisfied with the process. And look at this, his first class, this transition class, and look, I think a lot of it, of course, has to do with expectations coming into to this final day, and probably where you stand, and the perception of Florida right now. I do think, like you said, kind of going back to your point, yeah, it's probably still more open ended than some fans out there want it to be. You get your the look of the class, and a big chance for it to be, to answer some questions is more, can he hit again like he did on early signing day? Can you get those big targets like you got on early signing day? Can you get the Devin Moore, the Shamar James type of recruits, Kamari Wilsons? Can you replicate that on National Signing Day? And that was the big storyline coming in, and that, of course, did not happen, of course. And I think a lot of it really does have to do with the expectation coming in, and then late, of course, coming in Trevante Citizen, and then the thought that Florida may be able to reel him into with not really a whole lot of inclination that it was going to happen up until National Signing Day Eve, the day before. So I think a lot of it really does have to do with expectations, with how disappointed you are in the day, in the finish for Florida. So, and then the perception. I do think we're getting a little bit too fast, Will, and kind of going to your point of maybe a lot of people wanted the question answered already. Is Florida ready for the big boy recruiting? Is Florida ready to close the gap versus Georgia and Alabama and Texas A&M? And yeah, we didn't get that answer today. Ultimately, I don't think we're going to get it anyway, given a transition class. But it is a little bit more open-ended right now than I think a lot of people out there want it to be. And that probably falls into how disappointed you are in the finish.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are fair points on both sides, right? The Napier coming in a week and a half before early signing day, the class sort of already falling apart before Mullen was even fired, and then further after Mullen was fired. The fact that the staff hadn't even been calling some of the guys that Napier was all of a sudden calling to try to get to come to Gainesville, that when he came in, guys like Nick Evers and Jaden Gibson decided to go elsewhere after having some initial meetings with him. And then, but at the same time, I mean, look, the only thing you can compare him to is prior administrations. And this recruiting class compares much more. It's in between Dan Mullen's transition class in 2018 and Jim McElwain's transition class in 2015. So, if you just look at star ratings, Mullins had 18 guys in his class, an average star rating of 3.67. Napier's got 17, an average star rating of 3.41. Mullen, his average national rank for the players he signed was 399.7. Napier at 702.7. And then the average positional ranking for Mullen's recruits was 16.4. And for Napier was 47.5. So you start comparing those sorts of things and you say, okay, like the expectation was that Billy Napier was going to be a step up in recruiting compared to Dan Mullen. But when you actually compare these transition classes, that's not true. Now, the interesting thing is that, and this is really the criticism of Mullen, is that the recruiting never got any better from that first year. And so if the recruiting stays right where it is right now, except there's 25 or 26 guys in next year's class, you and I are going to be the first ones who are out there being highly, highly critical of it. I think the other thing that's very interesting is that if you look at like a recruiting class like Miami's, they've got a lot of guys in that sort of 100 to 250 range. I think they've got 5 guys ranked in the, between 101 and 200. But they only have a couple of top 100 guys, and those guys are both ranked below Florida's top 100 guys. So Kamari Wilson and Shamar James. And so the interesting thing is when you look at how those two classes are built, Miami's rated higher with less recruits and has a much higher overall recruit ranking. But the recruits that they brought in are in sort of that no man's land where a guy ranked 150th and a guy ranked 400th kind of usually from an odds perspective end up being about the same odds to make it to the NFL and be an impact player. I will be really interested to see whether the 17 guys that Florida's brought in 3 or 4 years from now, what do we think of those guys compared to the 13 that Miami's brought in and what Cristobal's done down there? So there's some comparison points here. I think if we look at the prior transition classes, I think this is disappointing compared to those. I think, you look at guys like Nick Saban who've built championship teams. They wound up ranked 12th overall. But all you really need from a transition class is a couple of guys to be all SEC players. Because if you look at Mullen's 2018 class, yeah, it was ranked higher, but you got contributions from Jacob Copeland, Richard Garage, Emory Jones, Kyle Pitts, Amari Burney a little bit, Trey Dean a little bit, Damian Pierce, and that's about it. Unless you want to go all the way down to Evan McPherson down there at the bottom. So again, the question is going to be these 17 guys, where do you get contributions? And if Kamari Wilson and Shamar James both turn into all SEC players, then this is an unbelievable transition class. If both of those guys flame out, we're going to look back and say, whew, that was a rough one, right? And the disappointment at missing out on Perkins, the disappointment missing out on Matthews, the disappointment at missing out on Citizen is that those guys are all another lottery ticket essentially to get that all SEC player in this particular class. And they need 1 or 2 to supplement what hopefully is a monster class next year. Now, I will say that 17 players means that you've now got 8 slots. You can count back from the next year. So you look at Texas A&M's class, I think they got 29 guys in their class this year. And the only reason you can do that is because you have less guys the previous year. And so Napier has saved up a couple of open chambers in the gun to fill with guys who are high level next year or bring in guys who are transfers. Right. And so he talked a little bit during the press conference today about the scholarship limitation at 85 and how that impacts how many transfers they're going to bring in. Well, that scholarship limit as well as the counters and the way that works it works that way for the 2023 class as well. So again, I can understand why people would be disappointed. I look at it and I had high hopes for today that at least one of those guys was going to end up wearing orange and blue. And the fact that none of them does means that you go, okay, well, on to next year. And that's disappointing, right? Because you do want an answer. Like Harold Perkins comes to campus and you go, okay, like Perkins and Wilson are 2 of the better players to set foot on Gainesville's campus in the last 4 or 5 years. And regardless of what the rest of the class looks like, you can point at that top end and say, hey, look, we've got some real top end talent coming in. As of right now, there's some top end talent, but there's also a lot of guys who are going to be development players, which means that the transfer portal and the guys who come over, they're going to have to hit on, right? And really, when you think about what Florida's been the last 3 or 4 years, guys like Trevon Grimes, guys like Van Jefferson hit, and Florida is able to continue to motor on and win a bunch of games when guys like Justin Shorter and Tyrone Truesdell and Antonio Valentino don't necessarily turn into difference makers, then all of a sudden the program struggles. And so what you don't want to do is get in that revolving door of constantly having to rely on the transfer portal. You'd much rather be like Alabama, right? Where you're using the transfer portal to essentially just sort of supplement in areas where maybe you need a little bit of competition or where you maybe lost a guy or 2 because of injury or transfer.
Yeah, well, so look, there's a reason for it, I think, too. I think that's where I want to go with this. And I think, of course, recruiting, most of the time, it's you either get them or you don't. It's pretty cut and dry of how people feel. Like, look, they don't care about excuses. Look, I mean, look, we've been there. We've beat this drum. We've beat the recruiting drum ever since we started Gators Breakdown and hammered in on recruiting and how important it is and all that. And I'm not trying to make excuses for this. It is a transition class that's going to play into it as well. But there's, I think, different ways to look at this transition class. It was really going into today, Will, with those targets that Florida was going after. I mean, it was a big risk, but a big risk that really needed to be taken here by Billy Napier. And we know the future of Florida recruiting. He was asked about it today, so we'll get into it. But the future of Florida recruiting is going to be based on in-state talent. And that's where, today it was based on big out-of-state targets. So Billy Napier was asked about that today. And I really think that goes pretty far into, basically what ended up being a struggle on National Signing Day.
We've heard for decades that you got to take care of your backyard in Florida, in the state. Only six guys from the state. Do you feel like that's where you need to make inroads moving forward, or is that just kind of a 1 year kind of blip, given that you're from Louisiana and whatnot?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think that it's a product of the circumstance. I think, we were basically just had to go evaluate the players that were available, right? We looked all over the country, and I think we're pretty spread out in this class. So I think that's a product of the circumstances. Those are the players that, we felt like fit us from an evaluation standpoint, and then we had the resources to go get that accomplished. I think that's the one thing to remind ourselves of is, that Florida brand is strong, and it spread out and was able to do good work. But, our approach is going to be inside out. There's no question. I think history would indicate that when Florida has a really good football team, it starts right here in our backyard and works out. So that's the approach that we will take, and certainly with the 23 group, which we've already started on, that'll be the mentality for sure.
Well, that goes a long way for me not overreacting about today. Would I love for those guys, and we'll get into the storylines, but would I love for Florida to hit on those big targets? Yes. But, like I said, it was a risk that needed to be taken of going out of state. And we've talked ad nauseum about, how Florida should have been doing better in state. And I think that's part of the struggle with this class. You stepped into a bad situation in the state of Florida. There wasn't much of an option for Napier to finish this class based off of in-state recruiting. That would have helped a lot, I think. And if some of these big targets were in-state guys, then I think we'd get more of an idea of maybe the path of recruiting under Billy Napier. But I don't think we got it because of these big targets being out of state. Mullen left nothing to help in that regard for the in-state talent. The state's best talent's already signed and gone pretty much by the time Napier hits the ground. So this class was going to have to be built out of state if you wanted to hit on top talent. And Louisiana was a place, Texas was a place, of course, given Billy Napier's history there, but going to the state of Louisiana, going with everything that was happening at LSU, Louisiana was a prime state for Billy Napier because of his history and what was going on at LSU. It was always going to be a tough task, but it was about the only path for a big splash for Billy Napier because of the lack of in-state talent, lack of in-state targets, and the lack of the groundwork laid by the previous staff, or lack of groundwork laid by the previous staff in state. And you hit that early on early signing day. Kamari Wilson, Devin Moore, you get those guys in state early, but also you're the big target. Shamar James, Chris McClellan, you got those two on early signing day. But it was very interesting to me. You got the best players in the class on early signing day. So there wasn't much left today to go get. You had to go out of state to go get them. You had to go pursue Harold Perkins, Jacoby Matthews, Javante Citizen, Trevor Etienne for this class to finish out on a high note. It was going to be very difficult. All the connections to LSU, all the connections to Texas A&M for those recruits. Look, that's not going to be the case moving forward in recruiting. Starting with the 2023 class. It'll be about more of the in-state kids, more prospects now that we see Billy Napier having a relationship with, relationships of the coaches that he's been out there creating. You and I have brought up the whole point of that big coaching convention that was there a couple weeks ago, and they had never heard from Dan Mullen and taking part in that. Billy Napier's there already shaking hands and getting ready to know coaches. We'll see that pay off in 2023. More of a relationship, that he's going to be building for months now, not these last few weeks. So I don't want to make excuses for the misses of the day. They are misses, but I do think there are reasons for those misses that I just don't think hold up in evaluating the staff moving forward. their potential to recruit at a high enough level to compete. I like the process. I like the foundation. A lot of the conversations I've had from the people closer to the program and everything that's changing, I think it's going in the right direction. I would have loved to see Florida get their share today, but I can't get myself worked up. I can't get the little bit of, overreaction, I think, that says, oh, no, nothing's changed. This is the same old, based off of a transition class, based off of what we saw today, because I really do think the process is being laid to now you go hit in-state. And I think you can cherry pick out of state. So I don't think the in-state option was here that is going to be there in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment, but I also think it's a little bit of excuse making. I think at the end of the day, like you get evaluated based on who's on your roster. And when you go and you play LSU, or you go and you play Texas A&M, or you go and you play Georgia, nobody's going to feel sorry for you that you didn't have, that during your transition class, your state had already been rated. Now, part of that absolutely is a reflection on Dan Mullen. And quite honestly, Manny Diaz and the guy up at Florida State as well. You start looking at that and go, geez, like everybody's leaving the state. Like no one was deciding between Florida State and had to flip. Everybody was deciding between A&M, Georgia, and Alabama, and you would have had to flip them. So yeah, it becomes a little bit difficult there. Like, when Napier came in, once the guys who weren't solid decided to leave, the class was ranked 77th nationally, had an average player rating of 87.6. Sort of the Gators were sitting there about 25th overall. So if he had just filled up the class with the exact same quality that was in the class when he took over, that's where the class would have ended up. Class is going to end up around 19th. Obviously, you still got Arliss Boardingham on the list, who might potentially come this way, but so they're going to end up right around that 18th, 19th spot.
There you go.
Hey, there you go. So depending upon who's ranking them, you're going to end up in that spot. So it's not as though he's done a terrible job. It's just that he hasn't gone above and beyond what expectations are, right? So you sit there and you look at it, and you're right. The guys that he pulled in, like Kamari Wilson and Devin Moore and Shamar James in that early signing day, sort of set the expectation that Florida isn't going to lose any of these battles, or at least that Florida's going to be competitive.
I was going to say that too. Timing is part of this. What if those guys had signed today? How much better would we? How much better would we feel?
It's interesting because as I was writing my preview article this week, the thing that I was looking at is I'm like, God, there aren't any numbers that say this class is all that great compared to some of the transition classes before. The perception of what he did during early signing day is really what made you feel like you were secure with Billy Napier. And plus the fact that everything you hear from people that we know, just people on the ground, like everything you hear is that the tone and sort of the feel of the program is completely different. And, you got people like Katie Turner and Bree Wade out there on Twitter, certainly giving things a little bit different flavor. And so you start putting those things together and you go, hey, we're really building something here. Now, the one thing I think we need to make sure that we're clear on is that we've always been very conscientious about talking about process, and that process is more important than results. So you look there and you go, look, Harold Perkins being interested is a big deal, because having a guy like Perkins interested says that Napier is pretty good at selling. Now, it also says that he probably shouldn't try to go into Louisiana and pull guys who have dreamed about going to LSU their entire life over to Florida. I think at the end of you really need to make sure that the process now is Jacksonville. The process now is Lakeland. The process now is getting up towards Tallahassee. The process is having things in place in South Florida. And if you think about it, he said today that he's been traveling and focusing on the 2022 class, but then trying to make his way around for 2023. That's not true. Because if it was true, he wouldn't be going to all these high schools and taking pictures of all these high school coaches and doing high school camps and all that sort of stuff. That is a process to make sure that you have good relationships with coaches in the state of Florida. And that has nothing to do with the 2022 class. So, at the end of the day, I think there is concern that you weren't able to close the deal, concern that it would have been fantastic to pull these guys from out of state. At the same time, what you and I think I want to see is a process that leads to results. And so if high school coaches are raving about Billy Napier in the state of Florida, if 5-star recruits from Jacksonville, Lakeland, Boca Raton, Lake City, like all those places sort of around Gainesville are considering Florida, and he's now starting to sign at least a 50% clip on them, then you say, okay, the process is starting to pay off. He said himself when he came, if he can't sign 25 good players, then we should be looking for a new coach. And, I'm not ready to hold him to that yet, but next year we'll be ready to hold him to that. So, look, it goes back to what you said. I think we all were hoping we would get an answer to, is Napier a significant upgrade when it comes to recruiting? Is Florida now ready to compete with the big boys? We didn't get that answer today. And that doesn't mean that the answer isn't yes. It just means that we're not sure that the answer is yes. And we're also not sure that the answer is no. But it's cloudy. And so, nobody likes uncertainty. And so you're going to have people on both sides of the argument. But I think there are reasons to be very encouraged from this class.
Right?
What's that?
Extreme patience, right?
Well, so he didn't do himself a lot of favors today when he mentioned there are a couple more to come during the news conference, and sort of got everybody excited. Oh, he knows something we don't, right? So, again, that would be the first PR misstep in the Billy Napier era, getting everybody excited. Look, and
I want to go back to I guess to your point. I guess maybe it does sound like I was excuse making whatever. I just don't, you talked about the process and the instant. I just don't think that there was not the opportunity for the process to play out.
Well, I mean, so he clearly was left in a hole that the previous Florida administrations have not left their coaches in, right? Like, I think Dan Mullen, from a talent perspective, has left him a roster that's more talented than the roster that Mullen inherited from Jim McElwain. But I think when Jim McElwain,
our good friend Bud Elliott, Florida has 66% blue chip percentage, and I think that was like top 5, 6 or something like that. There were a few teams at that 66%.
Yeah. So heck, the team was like, again, you go back to like the roster rankings that 24/7 has. They're like the 7th ranked roster in the country this past year. It doesn't do you any good when you go 6 and 7, obviously. But so talent is an issue when you come up against Georgia, and is an issue when you come up against Alabama, but it shouldn't be an issue when you come up against Kentucky, and it shouldn't be an issue when you come up against, even LSU the last couple of years. And so, I guess I look at it and say, we didn't gain any ground on those folks today, but I'm not sure we lost a bunch of ground to the folks who we should be beating. Right. The only team that maybe Florida lost a little bit of ground to today is Missouri. And I don't expect Missouri to be somebody who's constantly, nipping at Florida's heels on the recruiting trail once we get somebody who puts the full process in place. So Napier came here talking about process. He came here talking about being patient. I know Florida fans, and myself in particular, are not notorious for being patient, but I think we need to be patient. But the patience is not, we'll wait until he shows it on the field. The patience is, this 2023 class needs to start filling out quickly. And, by the time we get to August, we're going to know really whether this 2023 class is different than the things that we've seen with Dan Mullen, and different than the things we've seen with Jim McElwain. So, look, I don't think it's time to throw yourself off a cliff, but I think it's time to sit back and take another look and say, all right, well, 6 months from now, let's see where we are, because that's going to be more telling for the program than right today. And that's sort of always the way it is, right? Is, you're always 6 months away from a good recruiting class and 6 months away from recruiting that's elite. And, Mullen could never quite get over that hump, and we'll see what Napier can do. Now, I will say the history for Napier is pretty positive, right? So when he took over at Louisiana, I think he had like the 105th ranked recruiting class, and it was like 5th or 6th in the Sun Belt. And then all of a sudden he rolled off 4 straight years where they were first in the Sun Belt, and in sort of like the high 60s and low 70s. And so what that sort of says is that he's got the ability to make that jump. And that was actually something I remember I gave a talk at the Gainesville Quarterback Club right before Napier was hired. And that was one of the things that when you looked at the coaches who were available, a lot of the coaches didn't necessarily show a real significant jump from that first class to the second class. And the two guys who showed that that I evaluated for that particular talk were Napier and then Hugh Freeze. Those were the two guys who, when they got in their first class, it was okay. they sort of matched what they had seen previously. And in fact, if you go back and look at Louisiana, Napier basically matched what his predecessor was doing at Louisiana that first year, which is kind of what he did, maybe a little bit behind Mullen, but this is pretty much an equivalent class when you really start digging deep into the numbers and the quality of the players. And
right, and especially where this class was trending before the fire.
Sure. But again, I go back to, it's not as though Louisiana was in a good place and Napier took over. So Napier takes over, essentially matches what his predecessor had done on the recruiting trail, and then blew him out of the water for 4 straight years after that. So that's the expectation, right? The expectation. Yep. And we know that that's what's going to happen because, I think it was no SEC champion since like Georgia in like 2005 has won the SEC championship without having a top 5 class 4 years prior to winning the SEC title. And if you take Auburn out of that, nobody's won without having a top 2 class. So it's what it takes to win the SEC.
Top 2 in conference. Top 2 in conference?
No, top 2 nationally.
Yeah, top 2 overall.
If you look at the 4 classes before they win the SEC championship, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, all those teams that have won the SEC championship, they've had at least one top 2 class, except for Auburn, who had top 5 classes for their 2 SEC championships. And then the Georgia team under Mark Richt that won the SEC championship did not have, they had like a 7th and a 10th or something like that. So you got to go all the way back to, back when recruiting rankings were just starting. To start. So basically, once we started tracking this stuff and sort of got a track record, pretty much to win the SEC, you got to have at least, I would say top 2, right, is sort of what the benchmark is. One of them, they're 7th, 3rd, 6th, 2nd, and you'll see that. Now Alabama obviously is like 1-1-2-1, and Georgia's been that too the last couple of years. But there's a defined necessity to recruit at that level. And Bill Sykes has written for my site, and I'm sure you'll have Bill on at some point. You always sort of get him around when recruiting comes up.
Bill will be on Monday.
Hey, awesome. So, look, he wrote something on my site a couple of years ago where he talked about, what needs to happen for a bump class. You got to have an increase of 8.2 spots in the national rankings, an increase of 2.3 spots in the conference rankings. You need 2.35 stars, an average national ranking of 4.7, and an average conference ranking of 2.3. Those are for all SEC championship coaches since 2005. So that's what you're looking for. You need an average national ranking of essentially 4, an average conference ranking of 2, and you need 17 blue chips, and 2 or 3 of them need to be 5 stars. The expectation for next year, we'll see whether he can do it. But you go and look at all those guys who won SEC championships, and their classes were not significantly better than what Napier put up today. Maybe 4 or 5 spots in the rankings, maybe an extra blue chip or 2. But you start sort of going through, like if you go through Kirby Smart's 2016 class, you start listing all the guys there. There are probably 5 guys who started for Georgia out of that class. You go and look at the Alabama class in 2007. There are probably 5 guys who started for Alabama out of that class. The reality is you're putting together a class so quickly, and you're sort of trying to pick and choose from different areas. And I think one of the things that we need to,
Will, that's what he said today. 59 days since he flew into Gainesville.
Well, so one of those things that you got to realize is that you're going to have a lot of attrition, you're going to have a lot of turnover, and you're not going to get a ton out of this class. So when we look at it, again, you go and look at Mullen's 2018, basically Copeland, Emory Jones, Kyle Pitts, and Damian Pierce. Those are the 4 guys that you would say were positive contributors to the team where you said that's a starter and I want him on the field. Trey Dean and Amari Burney were sort of up and down. Justin Watkins was a high guy who never really, who got kicked off the team. And then Richard Garage, I think you would say as well, since he was a starter.
I'd put Garage and Dean and stuff probably above Emory as far as don't get me wrong, not great contributors, but more so positive than that. And you're right. I mean, the history shows there's in this transition class, for no matter where you go look, you're lucky to get a few big time contributors.
Well, and if you think about who Florida got at signing day in that 2018 class, I want to say that the guys that committed were Justin Watkins, who never played, Malik Langham, who never played, and then Andrew Chatfield, who played very, very slightly and then transferred out. Like if we go back and look, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure that those are the three guys who committed on signing day. There was a guy in the top 100. There was a guy in the top 200 and a guy in the top 300. I know Langham and Chatfield were guys who recruited, who signed on that day. And so you think about that. I mean, just look at the list: Chatfield, David Reese, Malik Langham, Iverson Clement, John Huggins, Chris Blake, Randy Russell, Dante Lang, Griffin McDowell. Until you get down to Evan McPherson, like basically from, that 11 or 12 spot on out of the 18 guys, you don't get any sort of contributions really to the team at all. And that's not unique to Dan Mullen. If you do the same thing with the 2015 class for Jim McElwain, right, you're going to run. Go for it. Read it off for me.
Okay, here's your top 4 from that class. Martez Ivey, contributor. CeCe Jefferson, contributor. Jordan Scarlett, contributor. Antonio Callaway, contributor. So McElwain, those top 4 he hit on: Jordan Cronkrite, Tyler Jordan, Chris Williamson, Daniel Motor Bebe. I think I said that right.
Well, he played at like 17 different schools, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not another contributor till maybe one of the best ones out of the bunch, besides Antonio Callaway, Jabari Zuniga.
Zuniga, yeah.
Yep. Brandon Sandifer, Cameron Knight, Kylan Johnson, Khalif Jackson, Andrew Ivey, Kavanis Davis, Richard Desir Jones, Fred Johnson. There you go. Nick Buchanan, Rayshad Jackson, Luke Ankrum.
Well, and if you so
5,
okay,
6.
that's Florida. That's Florida, and Florida wasn't successful. Here's Alabama's transition class under Nick Saban: Michael Ricks, Luther Davis, Rolando McClain, very good player, Brandon Gibson, William Vlachos, who is an offensive lineman, Alex Watkins, Demetrius Good, Chris Lett, Alfred McCullough, Nick Gentry, Jeremy Griffin, Marquise Mays, again, a name that you recognize, Jamar Taylor, Kareem Jackson, somebody you recognize, Nick Fanuzzi, Patrick Crump, Josh Chapman, Terrence Farmer, Chavis Williams, Darius Hanks, Jeremy Elder, Jennings Hester, Chris Underwood, J.B. Kern, Logan Thomas, Michael DeJohn, Rob Azell, Colin Gallagher, Mark Holt. 4 guys.
Yeah.
And actually, let's do it for Georgia too, because that's always a fun one. Hold on, let me find them. Because I was looking at that one thinking about, so Georgia actually had a much higher ranking in the transition class. So it was like, well, they had a much higher ranking. Surely they'll be better. Jacob Eason, Mecole Hardman, Isaac Nada, Julian Rochester, Ben Cleveland, Chauncey Manick, Mikhail Carter, Charlie Werner, Elijah Holyfield, Jaleel Lagwins, Riley Ridley, that's a good one, Tyler Clark, Javon Wims, who is a community college transfer, Chad Clay, Tyler Simmons, David Marshall, Chris Barnes. So again, I don't need to sit here and do this the entire time, but the point is that you start looking at it. And I think a lot of us looked at Isaac Nada and said, that guy's going to be a stud. And then it turns out that Isaac Nada really struggled in some capacity. When he was there at Georgia, he never met his potential. Well, the question is that because he was a transition guy who came into a program where he didn't necessarily fit, or he came into a program where the relationships weren't there, or whatever, right? So, not making excuses. I'm just saying, from an expectations perspective, the expectation should be that when we look back at this 2022 class, we're going to say, wow, Kamari Wilson, Shamar James, Devin Moore, and Jamari Lyons are the 4 guys who really stood out from that particular class. And everybody else, there were a couple of contributors in there, but nobody who really changed the program. And I think next year, obviously, we're going to need to see that. And I think one of the things we're going to need to look for is what can Napier do with the 2020 and 2021 classes that Mullen brought in, so that he can sort of use next year's class and this year's class to supplement the guys who are already in the program.
Yeah, much different too. Transfer portal, you throw into the mix there, Osiris Torrance. But you're looking here for, when you look at transfer portal, Will, and you start throwing that in, you're looking at instant contributors that you didn't necessarily really have in the Jim McElwain transition class, Dan Mullen transition class, because of the transfer portal and early signing day basically just starting to kind of form there. Still more of the traditional recruiting outside of transfer portal recruiting that we see it now. So, of course, that had changed some things as well, and that goes into the rankings. So there's a list right there that we'll go to. I just threw that up while Will was talking. So while we were comparing classes there, we'll get into more of that just a second. We'll hit on the highlights or lowlights of today, the specific storylines, why Florida ended up in the certain rankings and all that. But before we do, your team might have missed a big game this year, but MyBookie's double deposit bonus. Make sure you won't. Sign up at MyBookie now. Use promo code Gators to have your first deposit matched instantly, so you can get in on all the action of Super Bowl 56. The only way watching the biggest game of the year could get any better is to get paid doing it, and MyBookie gives you everything you need to do it. With double your money, you can double your winnings, and the best starting point for the big game is with Super Bowl prop bets. Whether it's on or off the field, there's no shortage of wagers to choose from for the Super Bowl. So get in on the action, let the confetti fall, and walk away a winner. Don't miss out. Head to MyBookie, double your first deposit up to $1,000 by using promo code Gators. Place your bets. Get ready for unmatched excitement of the Super Bowl. Bet on anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie. All right, well, so there's a list there of the commits. We'll go through one more time. Max Brown at quarterback. David Connor, these in alphabetical order, by the way. Sit here on YouTube. You can see the graphic of the listed names. Max Brown at quarterback. David Connor, offensive tackle. Caleb Douglas at wide receiver. We'll get into him in just a bit. Trevor Etienne at running back. Jalen Farmer will get into his storyline a bit too for today. Hayden Hanson. Shamar James at linebacker. Montrell Johnson at running back, transfer from Louisiana. Jalen Kimber, defensive back, transfer from Georgia. Tony Livingston, Jamari Lyons, Chris McClellan, Jack Miller at quarterback, Miguel Mitchell at safety, Devin Moore at cornerback, Jack Pyburn, recent commit signee there, of course, from this week. Andrew Savanea, the defensive line. Trace Mack, Osiris Torrance, the offensive line transfer from Louisiana, as well as Cameron Waits, Christian Williams, and Kamari Wilson. There is your 2022 class for the Gators with Arliss Boardingham still out there, possibly to add to this class. Will, there's names. Equals out. Throw this back up there as well. As we look back at today, on 24/7 Sports Composite, Gators come in with the 19th ranked class. 24/7, also the great idea, the overall rankings, throw in the transfer portal as well. See it right here. 24/7 Sports overall, Gators 17th on 3. And there's on the 24/7 Sports Composite on 3, rivals ESPN, of course, just a high school. Look at this. On 3, Gators class comes in 25th. Rivals, they are ranked 24th. And on ESPN at 32. There's your summary right there for where the Gators rank. All right, well, so storylines of today, why Florida ended up right there in those rankings, not as high as most of the fan base wanted because of those big targets out there that Florida was going in for, those out-of-state targets, as I mentioned. I'll start with the big one. Harold Perkins, linebacker, chooses LSU. That was probably one of the biggest ones in question heading into the day. National Signing Day Eve probably started filtering out more LSU talk, but nobody was really confident in the pick until he absolutely made the pick there with his LSU fan family, of course, that you saw there in the pick. But at linebacker, number one linebacker in the country, chooses LSU over Florida. Then the other one that probably hurt the – I won't necessarily – that one hurt the most. But one that hurt a bit because it started trending Florida. Running back Javonte Citizen, National Signing Day Eve, started getting crystal balls to Florida, started trending Florida heading into National Signing Day. Would have thought he would choose Florida over LSU and Auburn. Well, it turns out Miami was that back there lurking just a bit, Will. Citizen ends up committing to the Hurricanes. Miami side even said, I was going through and kind of I was watching CBS 24/7 Sports coverage, and right before Citizen made his decision, Steve Wiltfong hops in and says, "Hey, I'm hearing Miami's making a big push for Citizen." So I start going on the message boards and stuff, and Miami was saying, "Yeah, there's they were actually sharing a thought that hey, there might be a clearer path for him to play at Miami depth chart may come into play here just a bit. So, look, that was initially, and if you go back and listen to Gators Breakdown on Monday, and every time I basically brought up Citizen, I didn't have a whole lot of confidence in him ending up at Florida just because of Florida's running back situation and numbers. They didn't think it made a whole lot of sense, but of course, got caught up in the whole crystal ball, all the predictions coming in on National Signing Day Eve of Citizen and the Gators. But, I just had a hard time seeing it initially, but the picks were coming in. And then you had Marshall Johnson, of course, a transfer for Florida, also getting ETN in this class as well, right, with Wright, Bowman, Lingard. Now, look, staff still made him a priority. Even with that depth at the Florida running back position, the staff made Citizen a priority. They let it be known they wanted him in Gainesville. But I never felt great about it. But, of course, you had to start following the crystal balls, and the people who are supposed to know that was that was the pick, Will. So in the end, it happens. Look, you want to stack talent in any possible way you can. Javonte Citizen is one of the best running backs out there, one of the best running backs available. Would have been a huge coup for this Gator. The Gator staff wanted to add him to this running back depth. In the end, Florida has good talent at running back, Will. It just could have got even better.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the reality is that there are a lot of places where Florida has good talent. The question is, what happens when there's an injury? What happens when there's a transfer? What happens when there's a guy who doesn't necessarily fit the program? All those sorts of things. And, I hesitate to call players lottery tickets because that feels like you're treating them like a commodity. But the reality is that these guys all have some odds. There's some percentage they're going to pan out, and Citizen has a higher percentage than some of the guys who are ranked lower. And so you want to have a guy like Citizen on your stat or on your roster, just like you want a guy like Harold Perkins, just like you want a guy like Jack Pyburn, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with Pyburn as a player. In fact, you kind of need to build your program on guys like Pyburn and guys like Jamari Lyons and guys like Christian Williams and Jalen Farmer. Like, those guys are all very important to the program. But at the end of the day, you want can't miss prospects as well. Now, I don't think Citizen is a can't miss prospect. I think Perkins is about as close you're going to get to a can't miss prospect. But the more opportunities you give to get yourself those 2, 3, 4 all SEC guys, you need to have a transition class, the better you are. So, anybody who's like, we didn't really need him, we're okay in the running back room. No, Napier thought he needed him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone after him, right? Napier realizes that we'll find a spot for a guy who's skilled at the running back position if we've got two people. Like, having two running backs who are excellent is a good problem to have. And the other thing is I suspect that just based on the numbers at wide receiver, that if you build up depth at running back, you might end up having to move some guys out to slot, just because there aren't a lot of guys there at wide receiver on scholarship right now at Florida. So, look, this is going to open up scholarships from the standpoint of not having to push people out the door. So for short term, maybe that's a good thing. It also probably opens up some opportunities to really target people in the transfer portal. One of the nice parts about
before you even move on from there, 2023 class is loaded at running back in the state of Florida. So there is somewhat of a silver lining, but like I said, I don't want to turn down top players, but there's a silver lining if you want to look for one.
Well, so here's the deal. Florida hadn't signed a guy out of high school since Naquan Wright when it comes to running backs. So if you want to compare Napier to previous staffs, you get ETN, right? The fact that you didn't bring two guys in, okay, yeah, I mean, it would have been great, but we didn't get that. The other thing is I would say, from the standpoint of what Florida had to have today, they did get that. So Jack Pyburn, Napier talked about him being on the edge, but also essentially being an outside linebacker. Said the same thing about Savanea, right? That he's going to be an edge rusher, but also a linebacker. If you look at where Florida sits in terms of its linebackers, there are only 8 guys, and that's with Amari Burney deciding to come back. And so having guys like Savanea, having guys like Pyburn who can step in and maybe even contribute at the linebacker position as well as defensive line, I think is important. Same thing when you think about when you think about the signing of Max Brown, you think about the signing of Etienne, and then you think about the signing of Douglas, right? Those are all open spots that Florida had at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. So it's important to get those guys. Now, obviously, you want guys who are as skilled as you can get at each of those spots, but you especially for a transition class, I'm actually interested to see whether the balance pays off, because I wrote an article called the 5-3 theory, and I don't know how many people read it, but the whole point was focus on the really, really top end guys and then fill out the rest of your roster with guys ranked 300 and below, because the guys ranked 300 to 500 basically turn into NFL players at the same rate as guys who are ranked 100 to 300. So spend your resources on those top guys. And it's interesting because when you look at who Napier was targeting, now obviously they didn't get Perkins, they didn't get Matthews, they didn't get Citizen, but they did get Wilson, Shamar James, and McClellan, and those are guys in that top 100. And then Etienne's at 186, and then the next is Devin Moore at 263, and then there's like 5 or 6 guys between 300 and 900. And I'm really interested to see what happens from a depth perspective here, because the transfer portal does kind of impact how you want to recruit, I think, right? There's nobody who's going to be looking to poach these guys off of the roster, and guys rated 100th, 150th, 186th, like those guys are people that other programs might go try to poach in the transfer portal. So I do wonder whether this type of approach for a transition class is going to be more effective than some of the ones previously, just because of having the transfer portal, live. But look, when it comes to Citizen, when it comes to Perkins, I would have loved to have had him, and I'm lying to you if I say I'm not disappointed. But it is what it is. You move on.
Yep, and like you said, Will, too, Matthews, of course, the DB, Jacoby Matthews. Looked like Florida was in great shape at one point, but as the closer we got to National Signing Day, it was not much of a surprise. Well, it doesn't make it any less of a loss or miss there, but Jacoby Matthews looked like it was just now a Texas A&M LSU battle at the end. Had connections to Corey Raymond from his time at LSU, of course. You thought that hopefully could pay off in the end. Was one of those out-of-state targets that's closer to Louisiana, Texas A&M battle, and falling short on that one. So that was the big 3 targets, of course, today: Perkins, Citizen, Matthews. Perkins, you just didn't know about heading into today. Thought there was a chance. Florida had put themselves. Florida did everything they possibly could to get into that one. But growing up in Louisiana, he was a Texas kid, but grew up in Louisiana, in New Orleans, family full of LSU fans. LSU is just that school, that state school that it's different. If you could compare it to Florida, Florida's never going to own the state of Florida like LSU owns the state of Louisiana. But what you hope, Florida can own Lakeland and own Jacksonville and own pockets of Florida. They would own like that. That's where you hope this is heading for in-state recruiting or something like that. Hard to pull those LSU, those kids that grow up LSU fans ultimately away from there. And then Matthews, that big LSU Texas A&M battle there. So A&M swoops in at last second, gets Matthews. So let's talk about, shame on me, I guess, for getting to the part where the kids Florida did get today, not to be overlooked here. But Caleb Douglas, their wide receiver, at the position Florida really, really needed there at wide receiver, chose Florida over LSU. So one of those Florida LSU battles, Florida did win today. Wide receiver coach Kerry Colbert, very instrumental here, getting an early visit from the new look Florida staff meant a lot to Douglas. Florida's only wide receiver recruit in the class after missing on DJ Allen on Tuesday. So Florida needed this one. 6'3", 192, shows good speed for his size, can make some difficult grabs with his long reach, reputation for making plays down the field. But Florida needed some skill player talent here, especially at the wide receiver position. And at the position of need, goes against Douglas. As you can see here on the YouTube version, 3-star on the 24/7 Sports Composite, but on 3, much higher. On 3 has him a 4-star there overall as the 296th ranked player in the country and 48th ranked wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that actually is a really interesting thing to look at when you look at some of Florida's players, is what the, I guess, standard error is or the standard deviation between each of the rankings. Because, one of the reasons why the 5 stars always pan out is it's obvious, right? You look at a guy like Harold Perkins, he just sort of jumps off the tape. Once you get down to 200, 300, 400, now the evaluation really starts to come in. So, Napier mentioned that Douglas switched from quarterback to wide receiver recently. So he's not he's not a natural wide receiver. He's been playing that position and going to camps his entire life. He's got good size, obviously, and then, seems to be a good athlete. So you start looking at that. And then what you said about wide receivers, right? I mean, geez, there's only 8 guys on the roster at this point, scholarship players. You got Justin Shorter, then you got Whittemore, Jamarcus Weston, Xavier Henderson, Jaquavion Fraziers, Marcus Burke, Dejon Reynolds, and Caleb Douglas. You think about his ability to get some playing time. I mean, geez, Shorter, Whittemore, Henderson and Fraziers and Weston a little bit. Those are the only guys who really have any experience out there on the field. So, it wouldn't be a surprise to see him get early playing time just because he's going to have to. I mean, if they want to run 4 wide and have 2 units of 4 wide, he's going to be one of those guys who's out there. So a big area of need, a big pickup for Florida, especially like you mentioned, DJ Allen going elsewhere, which meant that they needed somebody because you couldn't leave this wide receiver position empty in a recruiting class. And Caleb Douglas is a really good player. Again, I mean, not a 5-star guy, but at the same time, going to be a valuable contributor to the program. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of the theme of the day there for Florida is that they hopefully have a lot of guys who are going to be valuable contributors to the program.
Yeah. So one more. Caleb Douglas, 24/7 Sports Composite 3-star, the 470th ranked overall player, 67th wide receiver, a 4-star on the On3 consensus, 296th player overall, the 48th ranked wide receiver. Will, so one interesting storyline that come out of National Signing Day heading in was the commitment of Jalen Farmer, the offensive lineman. And it's Alabama got into the late mix. Alabama offered last week. He visits Alabama, and it turns out that it ends up Alabama not really pushing hard in the end, but still Florida had to fight off Kentucky, Auburn there in the mix as well toward the end. But Florida does hang on to the commitment to Jalen Farmer, a 3-star on the 24/7 Sports Composite, 687th ranked overall player there, the 31st interior offensive lineman. A 3-star as well on the On3 consensus, 730th overall, 57th ranked interior offensive lineman. More likely a guard here, Will, for the Gators. Aggressive physical play style. If you look at his highlights, pancakes guys, putting guys on their back here. Florida sent out here total 50 tackles and 2 sacks with a touchdown in the senior season, starting both ways on offense and defense. 2-way player that played left guard and defensive tackle. Named the 2021 Georgia 5A Region A Lineman of the Year. 3-year starter on an offensive line for Eastside High. Chose Florida over Kentucky, Auburn, and ultimately those are the 2 schools there in the end. I know there was that narrative out there, Florida beating Alabama, but from everything I can gather there at the end, they brought him in on the visit and everything, but decided ultimately not to offer Farmer in the end. But I know Corey Bender on 3 and talking to him, he is really high on Farmer. I think he does think this is one that is underrated here along the offensive line for the Gators. So, Will, we know the issues along offensive line for Florida in recent years. Throwing a body at it here and hopefully much more when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, so 2 things. One is that interior offensive line is a place where Florida struggled. And then the other thing is and I don't want to step on it too much, but I've read the rough draft that Bill Sykes has. He's writing something for my article or for my website on offensive linemen. And so just numbers becomes important. And, Farmer adds to those numbers. And, Florida had an offensive lineman on an official visit this weekend that they decided not to offer. And I'm sure that Farmer came into that play, right? That you had somebody in sort of as a backup plan, but then Farmer decides he's going to come to Gainesville. And that's how you end up with him coming. So, you think about David Connor there at offensive tackle, and then you got Christian Williams and Jalen Farmer at guard or interior offensive lineman. You got Cameron Waits coming in as a transfer for the 2021 class, but still a redshirt freshman. So you sort of have 4 guys really who are going to be getting their first playing time. And then you've bought some time too by bringing a guy like Osiris Torrance from Louisiana to be able to allow some of these young guys to develop. So, look, I'm glad to hear people are high on Farmer. I think the more numbers you get at offensive line, the better off you are. We all remember the Will Muschamp era where we didn't have enough offensive linemen for the spring game. And, that's certainly, I'm suspecting, not going to happen under Billy Napier. He's clearly made a point to focus both on the offensive and the defensive lines. In fact, when you look at it, you get the 3 offensive linemen in this class, and then you've got 4 defensive linemen, right? When you have McClellan, Jamari Lyons, 7A, and Pyburn. Obviously, 7A and Pyburn might be linebacker, defensive end hybrids, but at the same time, you think about what they're doing in terms of focusing. You got 17 guys in the class, and 7 of them are either offensive linemen or defensive linemen. I think that says something about where Napier's building the program.
Farmer, 6'5", 325 listed right there. Heard Will mention the name right here. Jack Pyburn, of course, he committed on Tuesday for the Gators, the day before National Signing Day. As Will said, can play all over the front 7. Shines mostly at getting in the backfield as that edge rusher. They're listed as an outside linebacker by Florida, so you got outside linebacker Buck Rush in. Of course, spent time with Mike Peterson on his visit last week, so he has some versatility. He may have. We'll have to see where he goes with that. 6'3", 265. Does he eventually grow out of that? But he's going to be starting in that edge rush, outside linebacker Buck role. However, Florida wants to determine that role, how they'll use that. There'll be multiple up front on defense, but very strong player, plays violent. I'd see how he develops more pass rushing moves, and if he can develop some coverage skills as well. But tallying 14 sacks, 109 tackles, 32 tackles for loss, 2 passes deflected, blocked field goal, fumble recovery, helped Bowls to the FHSAA Class 4 state championship finals in 2020, semifinals in 2019 and 2021. Chose Florida, of course, over Miami, Minnesota, Auburn. Interesting here, he almost early signed with Minnesota. That would have taken him out of the running to ever get that Florida offer, the dream offer. So maybe something happened there where he could, maybe he was starting to feel he's going to get some more offers, started getting some bigger offers. Miami, of course, Auburn, of course. So did not early sign with Minnesota. So that leaves him to be able to sign with Florida, of course. 3-star on the 24/7 Sports Composite, 441st overall player, 36 edge rusher, a 3-star on the On3 consensus, the 593rd ranked player, 51st edge rusher. And one benefit of him being here in Jacksonville, here's a short little interview here with Pyburn right after his commitment to Florida.
It's gonna be crazy, and it's gonna be another dream. I feel like there's gonna be all kind of dreams along this way, but I'm ready for it, and I'm embracing it, and I'm excited.
Give me a little more background on how how quickly you felt like you got that connection with Coach Napier and with his new staff, because there wasn't that long courtship that you had with the other schools.
Yeah, I would say just being able to go on an official visit, you get to spend a lot of the time with the coaches and really get to know them and spend a lot of one-on-one time with it. And just the remarks he was making and the things that he talked about were all the right things that resonated with me. And I could see that he was very similar-minded to me and had the same visions as me. And so I knew that he was the right coach for me.
The fact that you had gotten to this point with Miami and Auburn, as sort of as front runners, you kind of had been through the process of figuring out what was important to you.
Yes.
I suppose. So did that make it a little easier to make that decision because you kind of had that template waiting for you? Yes,
I think it did, and it was still tough because of the relationships I'd built with Auburn and Miami. And like I said there, I could seriously see myself playing at both places, but I thought this was the right fit for me and the perfect opportunity. When you were a 6-year-old pretending to be a Gator here in this school, who were you? I don't know. I don't even remember. I looked up at players like Tim Tebow and, later, probably 6-7 years ago, Jared Davis, and, players like that just played with relentless effort and just believed in the program. And it's those kind of things that just make me want to be like those guys and become a Gator great and, help the standard return.
There we go. Jack Pyburn, Will. Thanks to Cole Pepper there from News for Jacks for getting that interview, sharing that interview. Definitely excited to be a Gator. Was looking for that dream offer there. So just interesting there, Will, that got to spend some time with Billy Napier. Look, it probably didn't have to pull his arm too hard. Once he got that offer, he grew up with Gators, family Gators. But Jack Pyburn ends up picking Florida on the day before National Signing Day.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was reciting all Dan Mullen's catchphrases, their relentless effort and the Gator standard and all that sort of stuff. So he's clearly been paying attention for a little bit. But I think it's interesting. He also wrestles. This has been a common theme for these guys that Napier's brought in. I think I mentioned it last week that you just go down the list of all the people that Napier's brought in, and it almost always says they play basketball. In this case, this is somebody who's wrestled. Andrew Ivins over at 24/7 Sports calls him an effort-based player with a motor that tends to run pretty hot. Considering that that's the kind of player you need to stop a counter, probably a good addition. Look, I mean, the projection is a Power 5 starter. And I've been saying this over and over and over again. If you have Power 5 starters coming out of your transition class, then that's a positive thing. That's a significant add to your organization. And so a guy who's racked up, like you mentioned, 20 sacks and 50 tackles for loss in his final 2 years of high school, a guy who's going to be good in backside pursuit, who should be pretty good at getting leverage considering that he's a wrestler. And then you teach him some pass rush moves and some other things and get him to the quarterback. That's a valuable asset to have on a team. And so I think this is a significant addition for Florida. I think at the end of the day, you want guys who, when things get tough, dreamed about being a Gator since they were 6 years old. Because let's be honest, things are going to get tough for Florida at this point. If Napier's really going to turn the program around, if he's really going to change sort of the culture in terms of what Florida is in a sustainable program, he's going to need guys like Pyburn who care about the program and are willing to go through the growing pains that inevitably are coming over the next year or two. And potentially even, there might be some outside linebackers who come in next year who are better than Jack Pyburn. And so, being able to sort of set the standard of what being a Florida player is going to be when those guys come in, and being able to help supplement that, I think is going to be a big deal for Florida moving forward.
Yeah, and JC Sherbert, he used to work for one of the recruiting sites, but he owns bigspur.com now. TheBigSpur.com, I think it's more of a South Carolina site, but he tweeted, and I retweeted this morning on Pyburn. This guy may be the most underrated defensive end in the entire country. A high 4-star just by film without question. I expect he will be great for the Gators. Do not sleep on this one. So some high praise there coming Jack Pyburn's way of the various services out there. So I'm glad he's a Jacksonville kid. So I like the Jacksonville kids on the roster, and hopefully goes out there. And I know he expects Will to be an early contributor. He wants to play early. His goal is to be all SEC freshman there. So there's one Jack Pyburn looking. We talked about there's getting those contributors in the transition class. He's talking about being one pretty there early for the Gators. So. All right, there we go. There's the guys who committed to Florida that were kind of in question with Douglas. Farmer, he was already committed to Florida, but there was some question about that. He stayed committed to Florida. Pyburn's commitment yesterday there. Of course, like I said, we wanted bigger, better news there with the big three, Perkins, Citizen, Matthews. Didn't happen. So everybody else that was announced for Florida, we've already discussed when they committed to Florida. Whether they transferred in, whether they committed over the last couple of weeks or something like that. So, I'll throw it up there on YouTube. There's the list one more time for all the signees there for Florida. Will, one more interesting aspect of that, I know we talked about in-state before we sign off here on that, but if you break it down, 6 from the state of Florida, 3 from the state of Texas, 2 from the state of Alabama, 2 from Oklahoma, 1 from Georgia, 1 from Louisiana, 1 from Maryland, 1 from Washington. There's kind of the state breakdown there of the Gators signees.
Yeah, so all he needs to do to improve next year is bring in 4 or 5 5-stars from Florida, and we'll take this exact class with just sort of raking in the talent from the state. I think we'll all be happy with, right? And I think, the disappointment of the guys who didn't go our way does color the way we look at this. I think Florida got better. I think Florida got guys who are going to contribute. I don't think we'll know. So we've seen typically historically guys who end up on that all SEC freshman team really do develop into solid starters, NFL players, and potentially even all SEC players. So if you really want to start evaluating this class for Billy Napier, I think the time you're going to be able to evaluate it is in the November, December timeframe next year when you start thinking about which of these guys are going to be all SEC freshmen. So if a guy like Pyburn plays and becomes an all SEC freshman, okay, that's a success. We put a check mark there. The question is, we need about 4 of those, right? I think, even if you look at Saban, I think he got 2 all SEC guys from his transition class, but I do think there's a little bit of ground to be made up when it comes to sort of where Georgia and Alabama are. So I'd say we need 4. So if you look at the end of next year and Florida's got 3 or 4 guys on the all SEC freshman team, then I think we look back at this 2022 class and say it was a success. I think if you've got 1 guy or no guys on that all SEC freshman team, then we got to go, okay, hopefully there's other things going on. Hopefully bringing in guys from the transfer portal has worked, and hopefully we can sort of paper over some holes until we start really seeing the benefits of the process that Napier's putting in place take hold. I think when I look at this list, there's a lot of high upside guys. So you think about a guy like Tony Livingston, who's really a freak athlete, but hasn't necessarily found a position yet. You look at a guy like David Connor, who again is a very good athlete, but not necessarily a nuanced offensive tackle. You look at a guy like Trey Smack, actually, and I think that's important too, because I mean, we all know what can happen when you've got struggles with the kicking game. So just again, you think about special teams, think about our game changer coordinator, making sure that we're making those sorts of plays and just making the 40-yard field goal when it's there. I think that's important. And even a guy like Max.
I mean, Hayden Hanson was somebody, Billy Napier brought up really good today, big time. Like, hey, we tested this kid at Louisiana, when he committed there. I was like, how does this kid not have bigger offense? This is a, really respected head coach in Billy Napier in recruiting circles. Now big enough now to get the Florida job. He's saying, well, we tested this guy at Louisiana, and I'm wondering what the deal is. Why this kid, size, measurables, we test him, his speed, and why he doesn't have larger offers. So, if that's going to play out that way, then we'll eventually see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And even a guy like Max Brown. The interesting thing, I didn't know this till today, but he said he's only been playing quarterback for a couple of years. And it's interesting because my analysis of Brown was he doesn't read defenses all that well, but he's got a pretty good arm, which is why he's ranked in that 1,500 range for overall nationally. But that starts to make sense when you think about, okay, if he's only been playing quarterback for a couple of years, this is a guy who can develop into a guy who can be a significant contributor for the program. Plus, he does run pretty well as well. I think he ran for like 1,500 yards last year. So there's a lot of talent here. The question is going to be, what can Napier do with it? And, even when you think about when you think about what was the undoing for Dan Mullen, it wasn't the 2018 class. It was the 2019 class. The 2019 class had a ton of attrition, didn't have a bunch of 5-stars in it. The guys who did come who were highly ranked didn't really turn out all that well. And you just start going down that 2019 list, and it's really ugly. And, so, and again, that 2019 class wasn't any better than the 2018 class just from a numbers perspective, right? And so I think that's the thing, is that this class is comparable to other transition classes that have been at Florida. I think you can argue, and I think it's an effective argument, that this one is slightly worse than the one that Dan Mullen brought in from an overall number perspective. But again, if I go back to where the things started to slide downhill for Dan Mullen, it was Chris Steele being the best recruit in 2019 and never seeing the field. It was having a guy like Jalen Jones.
Yeah, you made me pull up that 2019 class.
It's so ugly.
Oh my! I mean, you're right, man. It's we're going to get more into it and we've already got into it just a bit of how important the bump class is. Yeah, you can see why this past season looked like it hit rock bottom on the field. Because you go and look at this bump class, oh my, it is bad.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest contributors other than Kyrie Elam are probably Kingsley Agokan and Ethan White. And I guess you could make an argument that
You can
Diabate
throw
and Tyron
Diabate in.
Hopper, right? But
Yep.
those guys aren't with the program anymore.
Right.
So the vast majority of the guys from the 2019 class, which is the one that, like, if you looked at the teams that were in the playoff, they had a bunch of all conference guys from their 2019 class. Like, that was a common theme across every team. The only team that wasn't true for was Alabama, because it was their 2020 class that was driving all of the guys, driving them into the national championship or the national championship game. And so that's where this fell apart. I mean, when you really look at what happened for the Dan Mullen era, it was not the 2018 class. In fact, he kind of got what you would expect out of the 2018 class. He got some solid starters. You would have liked to have seen some more all SEC guys, but Kyle Pitts was like a transcendent guy at tight end. So he got his one all SEC player. If he played Dameon Pierce more often, he might have had two all SEC players.
Yeah.
And you need 5, 6, 7 all SEC players from that bump class to supplement that. And Mullen didn't get that. And so he kept having to dip into the transfer portal. And I think that's the thing we want to look for is 2, 3, 4 guys from the guys you've got up here on the screen right now who turn into all SEC players in 2023 or 2024, and then supplement those guys with guys from the 2020 and 2021 classes. We've already seen a lot from Trevez Johnson. We've already seen a lot from Rashad Torrance. We've already seen a lot from Jason Marshall. So there's talent there. And the question is going to be, can Napier pull the most out of that? And then can he supplement it with some stars coming forward in the 2023 class?
All right, there you go. National Signing Day for Billy Napier's first class, the class of 2022 there. So, yeah, I'm not, no overreaction for me. I don't think this is any indication there that Florida's going to struggle on closing. Florida's going to struggle on getting top targets out there. More of a wait and see. We'll see. I like I said, I believe in the process. I believe in the foundation being built and really hitting in-state going into this ever so important bump class coming up for the Gators. So, what you got coming up right here on the heels of National Signing Day?
Yeah, so I'll have a short sort of statistical breakdown of it up tonight or tomorrow morning of what actually happened on signing day. Had some people over at the Patreon. We've got a Patreon for Read and Reaction. People over there asked me some questions for a mailbag that'll be up later this week as well. So if you're interested in supporting Read and Reaction, supporting what we do over there, head over to patreon.com/Read and Reaction, and you can ask questions, interact with us. Bonus episodes of stuff we got. So some exciting stuff we got coming up this off season, also into the season next year. I'm excited for Utah. I mean, it's one of those things where recruiting is interesting, and obviously over the last 3 or 4 years, there has been a lot of hope around the recruiting trail. And if nothing else, there's still hope. There's still stuff to look forward to with Billy Napier. And so, that old Morgan Freeman thing from the Shawshank Redemption, where, they're arguing about whether hope is a good thing or hope will drive you crazy. Thinking the Dan Mullen era, hope drove me crazy. So I'm still hopeful, but obviously there are still questions to be answered. And, we wouldn't have anything to talk about if everything, like, it would be boring to do Alabama breakdown. Just be like, brought in everybody again. Let's go win a national championship. Like, there wouldn't be any episodes from National Signing Day until the start of the season, because just dominate every year.
I'll trade it for trophies. It's fine.
I know, I would too. I'm lying. I would enjoy covering Alabama, but it is an interesting concept. So you and I have a couple of Georgia fans. You're from Georgia, so heck, Stetson Bennett's from your hometown. So
yep.
While I wish they had lost, in some really far place. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm happy that or I wanted them to lose. But I am paying attention to how appreciative they are for the championship. And I would say that in 2006 and 2008, I didn't appreciate how good those teams were and how rare that is that you get that opportunity. And I think as good as Steve Spurrier had Florida for so long, and then you had the Ron Zook 3 years where I was in school there. So thanks, Ron Zook, for that. And then we had Urban Meyer take over right when I left. Obviously, my timing is great. But then, so basically the supposition was that at Florida you win as long as you're not Ron Zook. And I don't think that's the appropriate supposition. I think this is hard. And I think we need to recognize that it's hard. And when Billy Napier has an awesome class, and when Billy Napier builds Florida into a program that can compete with the Alabamas and the Georgias and the A&Ms and the Ohio States and the Clemsons of the world, we need to appreciate it. Because that's the lesson that I learned from 2021, looking at the Georgia fans who hadn't experienced this since 1980, is it doesn't come around that often. And so the build is fun and breaking it down is fun. But, if Billy Napier is the guy we think he is, and if he can bring a championship to Florida, appreciate the ride, man, because, they don't come around that often. This is hard and it's fun. Right. It's going to be fun to see someone build a program into something that you look at and go, I'm really proud of what happened, how this was built, and the changes that have been made in the process that's been followed.
There we go. Good stuff from Will there. Yeah, nice perspective there. Well, let's start winning and let's start enjoying it. And yeah, kind of a tease there for on Will's side, my side too. Bill Sykes. I know Bill Sykes is going to have an article going up at Read and Reaction. He'll come on Gators Breakdown. We'll discuss and talk about that. We'll get Bill's thoughts on the recruiting, just in general. A lot of research there for bump classes. That's will be coming up too. But then, as Will has teased, a big look in the position we know Florida has to hit so much better offensive line. And yeah, Bill has some good stuff about how important offensive line recruiting is for especially for SEC teams in Florida, and just the failure that recruiting at that position has been not only under Dan Mullen but under Jim McElwain, dating back to Will Muschamp. It's just been and yeah, you'll see it in detail right there. So yeah, good stuff. And Will, I know I reached out to him too. I know this will be coming up with you guys like we did last year. We'll kind of go through the kind of a roster rundown. We'll bring on Nick Newsom, who's with you there at Read Reaction. So that'll be fun like we did last year in breaking down the whole roster. So everybody, all right, that'll do it for this episode. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Really helps us out here on Gators Breakdown. We'll get into, as I said, Bill Sykes next week to talk a little bit more recruiting and probably maybe pick ahead of that 2023 recruiting class just a bit as well. So I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. For Will Miles, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.